Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. I'm Brian Hyde, and I don't know if you felt it, but recently there was a very large disturbance in the force, as if thousands of, public education lobbyists suddenly realized that there is, in fact, a limit to what they would be willing to see spent in pursuit of education. In particular, I'm talking about a recent article that dropped. In fact, let me just bring this up. We'll start with the Lewiston Tribune. Report, ESA program could have steep price tag. Now, for all the talk we hear about how schools need to be fully funded, and of course this is the thing that legislators fail to do year after year. They never fully fund Idaho's schools. It's kind of interesting to see suddenly this great concern about, there might be more money associated with this than we want. But the subheadline here, Idaho Center for Fiscal Policy has found in a report that the cost of the proposed education savings account legislation is estimated to increase from $44 million in the first year to $363.8 million in the second. Now, we're going to take some of these numbers to task, and in fact, I actually have an excellent bit of analysis that rebuts this very well. But what I need you to understand is this is the talking point that certain people within the legacy media have just been waiting for. I mean, I really hope that, they didn't wet themselves, in their haste to try to get this out there. In fact, case in point, Brian Holmes, so quick. Look at this. Idaho Center for Fiscal Policy just released how they see SB 1038, the ESA bill, impacting the state budget. And it looks like a wallop to the state wallet. I think this is the first time I've ever heard him express any concern whatsoever for any kind of spending. But hey, since it's actually providing freedom and school choice to people, I guess this concerns Brian and like-minded statists. In fact, he doesn't even stick with the actual cost, 358 point something million. We just rounds it up. Nearly $4 million in the second year, and only 12% of public school students taking part. Now, you have to admit, that's pretty alarming stuff. Oh, my goodness. Why, that's so much more expensive than anybody said it would be. But you have to understand something, too. And as you're going to see here in a couple of tweets that help to illustrate this, this may or may not be, an ironclad case of, well, we've crunched the numbers and here is how reality shakes out. This is what, those of you who are in the military would refer to as a WAG, a wild something guess. And it may happen. There's the possibility that, yes, it is within the realm of possibility, but based on what has been happening with other states, and we're talking with a 20-plus year track record of school choice in many of these other states, as to what was the kind of participation, what kind of uptake did they see in terms of people, joining into these programs when they introduced school choice. It really doesn't seem likely that, you're going to see this incredible increase from 6,000 students. I believe it's capped for the first year, and then suddenly it's going to explode by more than 10 times, and the costs are going to explode. In fact, I was really surprised. So far, I have not seen any media accounts that use the words "blow a hole in the budget." But that seems to be one of their favorite catchphrases, probably because it sounds horrific, it sounds alarmist, it's so terrible and scary that surely nobody could be in favor of anything that might blow a hole in the state budget. So we'll just take a wallop to the state wallet, as Brian Holmes likes to put it. Now, Senator Brian Lenny, points out this is the same group, the IFCP, that promoted Medicaid expansion and actually got their numbers wrong. Now, that doesn't mean that everything they do is wrong, but let's at least admit that sometimes they wet a finger, put it up in the wind, and try to determine how might this play out. Now, as far as the ICFP, can we really trust that they are to be trusted here? Dustin Hurst says, nowhere does Brian mention that ICFP is a left-wing organization. In fact, I noticed that many of the articles say, well, these are a nonpartisan organization, but they're nonpartisan because they happen to agree with you. If this was coming from any right-wing group or any conservative-leaning group, oh, you better believe that qualifier would be there. Oh, the far right, ICFP. And Dustin points out this happens every time conservatives try something good. Now, thanks to ICFP, media types and fake conservatives have a bogus talking point. All right, so does it add up? Well, That remains to be seen. I liked this observation from I Got All the Game. Watching the Dems go from "we severely underspend on education in Idaho for the last 10 years, while it grew substantially year over year since 2014, now flipping to "we can't afford this," exposes a lack of foundational beliefs and proof that arguing in opposition is the real priority. Bingo. I think that's exactly what's going on. This isn't about, well, we're really concerned about saving the state money, because they're more than happy to spend other people's money, other people being the taxpayers. But if it's something that actually lessens the control of the state or lessens their influence in controlling the lives of other people, particularly public school students and their parents, well, we can't have anything like that. Right? That's something that just shouldn't be tolerated. Now, it also leaves us wondering, is it really going to be as crazy as they say, budget-wise? Thank you to the Idaho Freedom Foundation, and likewise to a wonderful report that they published. This was actually written by Martin Lucan. He's the director of fiscal policy and analysis at EdChoice, in response to this study by the Idaho Center for Fiscal Policy. So you can check this out for yourself. I would encourage you to look at this article in its entirety on idahofreedom.org. Now, I'm not telling you have to agree with it. I'm just saying, if you really want to see all sides of this issue, you really owe it to yourself to at least look at what is being said here. Martin Lucan says, based on experiences of states that have had choice programs operating for decades, Idaho Center for Fiscal Policy's analysis does not make sense. First, he says, educational choice programs have been operating in more than 30 states, many for more than a decade. Participation in choice programs tend to start very small and grow at a slow, steady pace. Now, this generally holds true both for targeted programs and broader eligibility programs. Martin Lucan goes on to say, in light of recent events like the COVID pandemic and political battles about education-related topics such as curriculum and parental rights, the popularity of and awareness of choice programs, especially education savings accounts, has increased. Now, it remains to be seen if interest in participating in these programs rises to the level that ICFP predicts. Based on states' experiences with current programs, however, the ICFP projections are overblown. That's worth considering. And I believe this report actually looks at several different reports, or several different states rather than just cherry picking. Well, we did find this one that seems to indicate that, Arizona or Iowa or somebody, blew a hole in their budget, to coin a phrase. Nonetheless, second, it is unlikely that 100% of newly eligible non-public and homeschool students will take up an ESA at any point in the life of the program, let alone in the first year. Based on the experiences of government social assistance programs, it's highly unlikely that all non-public school students will participate in the ESA program. Take-up rates for well-known programs that have been around for decades are not 100%. In fact, they actually give a pretty good accounting of this. They talk about the take-up rate for the temporary assistance for needy families, TANF, in 2016, just 24.9%. Its predecessor, the Aid to Families with Dependent Children, was established in 1935. The Earned Income Tax Credit, created in 1975. Participation in 2005, only 75%. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, preceded by the Food Stamp Program, created in 1939, the take-up rate in 2014 was only 83%. Now, I believe that this ICFP study is saying something in the neighborhood of 95% of those who are eligible are going to jump on this program. Now, the thing that I would ask you to consider, why would such a high percentage, in contravention to all these other programs and all these other types of assistance that have been offered, why would such a high number be considered likely? Unless there was something terribly, terribly wrong within the government-run education system. Something to think about. Third, many homeschool students will likely not take an ESA. In some states, homeschool organizations even oppose choice programs and don't want to be a part of them because of regulations and testing requirements. In fact, the same goes for private schools, some private schools. They will not accept an ESA for the same reason that homeschoolers refuse. Louisiana is an example where most private schools elect not to participate in the state's voucher program, largely because of stronger regulations. Finally, the ICFP's analysis ignores any potential savings from public school students who switch into the ESA program. Random assignment research on choice programs indicates that on average, 90% of students who applied to oversubscribed voucher programs and lost a lottery enrolled in public schools. So if they didn't qualify or they lost the lottery to take part in the program, they still went ahead and enrolled in public schools. And there's a very good likelihood that could continue to happen. In fact, we'll give you some concrete examples of why that is in just a moment. These student switchers would help offset the cost of the ESA program because the taxpayers would not have to support them in public school systems. See that? They'd actually be saving the taxpayers something. Although the programs in these studies are targeted to students with disadvantaged backgrounds, they indicate that even broad choice programs will likely have a portion of participating students who would enroll in public schools without any choice programs in place. Now, one of the things that was pointed out here again by this article was that a large portion of families are unaware of school choice programs. So it takes a while for the word to get out there that it's even available. Also, the program design includes low funding levels and limits placed on participation. And there are many families who just flat out are satisfied with existing options and really have no intention of changing. So maybe these fears are a little bit overblown. I mean, far be it, from the education establishment or their water carriers in the media to try to exaggerate something for the point of trying to put fear in people and drive a wedge. But certainly they seem to be running with this. There is one final point to consider here. Martin Lucan points out, although it is possible that ICFP's projections materialize, okay, it's in the realm of possibilities, it will likely require considerably more time and resources than portrayed in the analysis. This is why I'm sticking with the idea that they're making an educated guess, somewhere between an educated guess and a wild guess, but it's still a guess. Well, based on our projections, based on our agenda, this is what we think might happen. But there's nothing concrete to indicate that that's going to be the case. So be cautious, as you should be. Anytime there is, state spending of taxpayer money, you should be cautious. You should be aware. But also understand there's a strong incentive on the part of those who wish to maintain that government-run education monopoly and to try to put off any move towards meaningful school choice. It's almost like they don't want those young minds having options that would take them outside of that system. And you have to wonder why that is. Now, in our episode a little bit later this week, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things, including, the very graphic sexual education and imagery and obscenity that's being made available to students in Idaho, despite a very strong study that supposedly researched and said, yeah, that's not happening here. It is. And again, if you want to find out more, go to idahofreedom.org. If you just can't wait until Friday's program, please check it out for yourself. You will see that, no, it's very much going on. Now, obviously, one of the big problems that parents are facing right now is, how do I protect my child from an activist group that seems determined to drag them, in some cases kicking and screaming, but in most cases to try to entice them into the gender-bending world of, either gender identity and transsexuality or just flat out drag queen story hour. I thought you might appreciate this story out of Pocatello. Look at this headline. Members of local Christian congregations hold sit-in protest against Pocatello drag queen reading program. This was published in the Idaho State Journal just about a week ago. And I like this because I think this is actually a pretty feasible way for people who are opposed to this to register their disapproval without going out and creating confrontation or inviting violence. And I'm not saying that anybody who's opposed to, drag queen story hour is violence prone. I'm just saying that, you're seeing Antifa start to show up armed, to these events. Yeah, nobody seems to bat an eye within the media about those threats of violence, but by gosh, if a parent shows up and says this is not right, well, there was these angry far-right parents, and they were making me feel unsafe. And okay, whatever. But here's what happened at this event in Pocatello. East Idaho conservative leaders and members of local Christian churches held a peaceful sit-in to protest the Reading Time with the Queens event at the Marshall Public Library on Saturday. The Reading Time with the Queens program took place despite the critics in attendance, but instead of reading to actual children and their families, the organizers of Reading Time with the Queens said they delivered their programming, an apt word, by the way. Somebody's being programmed to a room full of adult children. All righty then. Now, the article goes on to say, according to Eric Seuss, director of the Marshall Public Library, the meeting room at the library has a maximum seating capacity of 40 people. Once the capacity of that room hit that number, those who arrived last were asked to leave. And those shown the exit were mostly the usual parents and children who attend Reading Time with the Queens, while the protesters were allowed to stay. All right, fair enough. Some may say, well, that's not fair. This was intended for children. But really, is it possible that this event can only have meaning if there are children watching guys in lingerie prance about and act out like they're women? Something just seems off about that, no matter how innocent they may try to portray it. Article says the local Reading Time with the Queens event typically begins with a craft-making session and includes individuals dressed in drag clothing, yes, men dressed in lingerie, reading books, a song-singing portion, and a brief sign language lesson, Crupper said. Saturday's event was no different aside from those seated in the audience. It was totally peaceful, and all of our people were polite. This was one of the actual protesters. Nobody made any rude comments. We were just trying to make a point that we believe this is an immoral issue that's using a public building and taxpayer money to promote it, and we believe that's wrong. Now, he continued, so we went in and sat down, took up the seats, and essentially there wasn't room in there for children to get in there. What we believe and what the Bible teaches is that what they're doing is a perversion. To invite children into that would be perverting their minds, and we stand against that. Now, of course, this did not go over well with a lot of people. Don Whitecar, that's who it was, the pastor of Mountain Valley Baptist Church in Pocatello, told the Idaho State Journal on Monday that he and others from his church and local Christian churches did travel to the Reading Time with the Queens event in a Mountain Valley Baptist Church bus. Whitecar said he attended the event because he finds it to be immoral and a point needed to be made. Now, I know that not everybody is inclined to stand up. Most people want to just kind of not draw attention to themselves, hide in the crowd. They know that they risk criticism, perhaps being ostracized, by people who will call you names and call you a bigot because you're standing up, either for something or standing against something that you believe is deleterious to, good morals, right and wrong. But I can't fault the way these people went about it. I think that they improvised, they filled the seats, and when it came time, what a sad thing. No children were able to get in there because the room was already full. Gosh, what a shame. Those kids were denied their chance to be introduced to a kinder, gentler form of deviancy that nonetheless, is aimed at grooming young minds, maybe not to be sexual predators, but certainly to be little left-wing activists. Moving on. Also in the article, local Republican Party leader David Worley, a former Pocatello mayoral candidate and former state legislator candidate, was also in attendance for the sit-in. And he said it was inspiring to see Christians of various faith traditions standing together, and that members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and at least 3 other churches were present. I think this is actually a very encouraging thing as well. And I say that from the standpoint of when people are able to put aside their differences. And I know with churches, oftentimes, you're not one of us. You don't see things the way that we do. People will focus on their differences. But there comes a point where the basic things that are at stake, the things that are true, may be so important that we need to set aside certain differences. Those minor differences may not make as big a difference as making sure that we are speaking with one voice to stand up against I'm just going to call it evil taking root within our communities. Now, surprisingly, it was not very well received by authorities from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Now, I'll explain more about that in just a moment. Worley continued, the purpose of this sit-in during the Reading Time with the Queens event was to protect children from being exposed to sexual deviancy. This event is also part of a series that seeks to normalize transgenderism, a flawed and immoral combination of radical sex ideology and pseudoscience, which causes irreparable harm to those who undergo its various chemical and surgical procedures. No public institution should be used to promote sexual deviancy and immorality. The innocence of children is sacred and should be protected by our community. That's what they were doing. Now, Krupper said he'll continue to host reading time with the Queens in the future, though Saturday's incident has caused some concern for him. He says part of him wants to continue hosting the weekly event in spite of Saturday's sit-in protest, but another part of him doesn't want to put the children in an environment that could become hostile if pro-drag supporters and anti-LGBT protesters, isn't that funny how that's portrayed? Pro-drag, pro-perversion supporters and anti-perversion protesters show up in force and tensions escalate. What I found very interesting, too, was the fact that a local spokesman for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints categorically said, we don't approve of this kind of thing. We do not, the church does not support this kind of protest. We believe in treating everybody kindly. And, you know, it's probably just an overreaction. Maybe it's a virtue signal. I don't know. But if you can show me an example of someone who was behaving poorly or treating someone as less than, this was not an evaluation of the people involved. It was an evaluation of the behavior that was involved. And I don't understand the need to, to try to grandstand on that and to walk it back. Well, no, we don't participate in those kinds of protests. You can stand for truth. And I think the only distinction that needs to be made is they're evaluating behavior. This is not a case of, judge not, lest ye be judged. Nobody's judging someone's eternal soul here. What they're doing is they're carrying out the idea that by their fruits ye shall know them. In other words, these are citizens who are acting as fruit inspectors and who are noticing that the behavior by which we recognize their fruits is not fit for children. So I don't know. I realize people may not agree with that, but it seems to me that the virtue signaling, the kinder, gentler look, everybody agrees, and I just want to validate you. There comes a time where you have to be willing to put your foot down. Now, you can do it gently. You can do it lovingly. And I think that these people actually did. These protesters who showed up and filled every seat, I think they did a wonderful job of that. Look, if they had they been rude, had they been brash, had they made threats, and had they, used profanity, you better believe that would have been all over the front page of every newspaper that remains in the state. It would have been trumpeted by the legacy media as an example of how hateful and intolerant, these protesters are. But they conducted themselves with respect, and I think they showed respect even to those who participated, despite, the disappointment that, we don't get to do this for kids? What's even the purpose? Shouldn't that tell you something too? My goodness. What is it about wanting to access these young minds and twist them as much as possible? All right, let's leave things on a little bit lighter note. Thought you would appreciate a headline from a couple years ago from the Babylon Bee. I don't know why, but this one struck me as particularly funny. Girl rushed to hospital for emergency gender reassignment surgery after showing up to school with a G.I. Joe. I'm grateful for sources of satire like the Babylon Bee and others that can inject a little bit of humor and at least the possibility of laughing at ourselves when it comes to some of these very serious topics. These are serious things. And I'm not encouraging you to take lightly the idea that there are people trying to force a bent mindset on these young children, and especially doing it in such a way that they're not even allowed to maintain the innocence that normally goes along with childhood. Look, life comes at us fast. Life beats that innocence out of us at a pretty early age. Popular culture will do it about as quick as anything. But to have activists specifically targeting kids and trying to get them into this gender-bending, questioning mindset, maybe we should abandon everything that came before us because it was stupid and religious and it was evil. I don't think it's a good idea. For the same reason you don't tear down a fence till you know why it was put up in the first place. And God bless those people who have the courage to stand up and stand in the way of those who would tear down the barriers that thousands of years worth of human thinking and experimenting and trying and testing have enacted. No, they weren't always right. But again, the idea that, well, only the folks of this enlightened time, and particularly those waving a rainbow flag, are the ones who can discern, what is right and what isn't. There's a very strong faddish feel to it. And I guess the best news about that is that things that go up quickly tend to come down rather quickly as well. I'm Brian Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Newspapers are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Brian, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see.
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how